Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar looking into the outlook for a company that really needs no introduction in the space industry. SpaceX's presence is now felt pretty much everywhere in the sector. They have transformed the satellite launch and communication industries, and their future successes or failures will have far-reaching ripple effects for the future of the space economy. So I'm delighted to be joined here today by Grace Kanuja and Lucas Plenny from Novaspace, who have just released the consultancy firm's first ever dedicated report on SpaceX's business. And for those of you who might not know, Novaspace, or more accurately, the part of it that used to be called Euroconsult, has been issuing market intelligence reports on the space industry for what, more than 40 years now. So this is a long time coming, maybe. I've got some time here to dig into some of the key findings, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, which you can submit via Zoom's Q&A function, which is a different function than the chat room. And my colleague Dan will help me get to them a little later. But firstly, Grace and Lucas, thank you both so much for your time today.
Yes, thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Jason, for the opportunity to talk about this. This is a super interesting project. So
Yeah,
I'm glad to
Well,
get into the details.
yeah. Well, let's start with just how do you even begin to compile such a detailed report on SpaceX? You know, a private company that doesn't share its financials without their input.
So yeah, SpaceX doesn't share it, but in the end, they leave a lot of breadcrumbs here and there. You have some reports they're publishing. So for instance, they are publishing a progress report on the Starlink side. We had some leaks that were happening a couple of years ago. Elon Musk is also quite vocal about a lot of costs and a lot of estimates about SpaceX. So you have a lot of hints here and there that you have to basically pick and then you have to connect the dots in between those. So it has been a super interesting investigation project, if I can say so. And we basically segmented this report into two business lines. The first about space transportation, which tracks basically Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, Dragon, and Starship. And the other business line would be Starlink here. And so we've conducted throughout research on all the Falcon 9 launches, all the boosters, all trackings of all the fairings. And this basically allowed us to have a detailed view about the estimates, about the flight costs, about frequency, etc. For the Starlink side, we've had to dive into as well a very detailed view of the regional dynamics, because as you know, SpaceX has a very aggressive and very dedicated pricing strategy depending on where they're selling their products and their service. So we've basically built up a whole model on this. And we all triangulated it with public data points. Since we're a research company, we also have proprietary databases to which we can cross-check this. So yeah, private company, but definitely leaves a lot of crumbs out there for us to follow.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. And we should say that Novaspace is not the only one out there attempting to shed light on SpaceX's closely guarded figures. Do your findings differ from others? And if so, how different are they and why?
So overall, our estimates tend to be a little bit more conservative. The biggest added value, I'd say, for this report is the depth of our Starlink cost and revenue model, and as well on the launch side. So we're pretty confident since we have a bottom-up approach. We tracked all the launches, we tracked everything. So we're pretty confident in our numbers. The two biggest, let's say, differences that we have with other SpaceX's models out there would be, the first one is, so for those space freaks, we can get a little bit into the details. So there's the aero contract, which is about this famously known Starship constellation. It's not a real name, but it's called that way. So we've opted for a more distributed approach when booking the $1.8 billion contract for this constellation. We're booking basically the contract as they are launching the satellites instead of booking the whole contract in 2025. So that changes a little bit the dynamics and the bottom line for our model at least. And the other one would be about what we're just discussing about this licensing for Starlink in certain countries. We estimate that certain big Asian countries will not or should maybe license Starlink by the end of the year. So by the time that they're producing the terminals and shipping them, and by the time the revenue starts flowing in, it should be already the end of 2025. So yeah, biggest differences are those two aero contracts on one side, and on the other side, the licensing of new countries that we estimate should hit more the books next year.
Good, good. Okay, and we're going to get into that very shortly. But before we do get into your headline findings, let's put up a slide that rounds up a busy year for SpaceX in 2024. Can we show that slide? So yeah, they launched 134 times last year, granted mostly for their Starlink broadband constellation, but that is still staggering and up 40% on last year. So Lucas, how does this performance compare with other launch providers? And do you see others catching up anytime soon? Do they need or plan to?
It will be tough. I mean, to be frank, SpaceX is breaking a record after record after record. To name just a few, they've reduced the launch delay between two launches of the same booster to 14 days now. They launched 3 Falcon 9s in less than 24 hours. I mean, their launch cadences is just off the charts. We don't see anyone catching up in the very short term, that's for sure. We'll see what happens in the middle to long term. Of course, there are competitors, whether it is Blue Origin coming into the market, Rocket Lab, of course, on a smaller scale, but scaling up with the Neutron, and even Chinese launch service providers. But the fact is that today SpaceX has, if not one, maybe 2 steps of advance compared to the competitors. And yeah, they just important things to notice is that yeah, Starlink, as you were saying, Jason, is contributing to most of that demand. So it is an internalized demand, and this is one of the major breaking points of SpaceX is that they pivoted towards a satellite operator instead of staying in the launch business. And we might maybe get more into the details of this later on.
Yeah, well, Grace, so you cover more the Starlink side of SpaceX's business. What milestones stand out here as most important in SpaceX's transition from a pure launch company to a vertically integrated space infrastructure provider?
Yeah, for sure. So overall, the year of 2024 was like a pivotal year for SpaceX as per our analysis. 2023 saw a uptake in subscribers overall for the company across applications, but 2024 saw a definite increase in year-on-year subscriber growth, which is what underpins the growth of the overall company as well. I think there was around 80% year-on-year growth in the subscribers from 2023 to 2024, which is a big amount when you look at it from the company perspective. And it also pushed the company towards becoming a cash positive firm, which was corroborated by the management of SpaceX as well, as they announced in late 2023 that the company is moving towards a cash positive territory, which definitely works out. So 2024 in that sense was quite a pivotal year for the company in terms of financial aspects as well. And then overall, I think the one thing that really caught our eye when we were doing this analysis, and you briefly touched on that in your question as well, was how the company's strategic value prop has started pivoting from a space transportation company to a satellite operator. And that's possible because of the vertical integration aspect as well, because having a base as a launch provider gives a big sort of push towards push and big sort of support to the satellite operator, especially from the launch side of things. And we'll dive in more on this, but there is a definite plus point of having a launch in your portfolio to be a satellite operator. So those were the things that really helped SpaceX performance in 2024.
Yeah, well, let's move on then to the key findings in your report. Can we get that slide up? And so Grace, For the first one here, you just touched on this. Can you walk through just what the report says about Starlink's user growth so far and what expectations do you have for its subscriber trajectory this year?
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, 2024 was like a growth year, especially for Starlink, with a lot of increase in subscribers, over 4 million year-end active subscribers in 2024. Great momentum in the mobility customer base, especially maritime, reaching like 75,000 vessels. A lot of in-flight connectivity contracts announced, like United, Air France, etc. So that shows the traction. A lot of new use cases like agriculture with John Deere announced. So that definitely spoke to the subscriber growth engine, subscriber growth for Starlink. And looking forward in 2025, if we leave out the regulatory approvals that might come in for countries like India and other Asian countries that could bring in a lot of volume, we still expect more than 50% growth in subscribers with the current countries and some minor approvals as well. And we expect the year-end active subscribers to reach around 6.5 million by end of 2025, which is again not just driven by mobility. It's driven by mobility a lot, but it's also added on by consumer broadband, enterprise sort of services. So overall, expanding into all sort of applications.
Wow. Okay, and then Lucas, if Starlink is the growth engine, where does that leave SpaceX's launch business?
Well, SpaceX's launch business is an enabler, let's say, for this Starlink business model. I mean, as Grace touched upon it, it is the basis on which Starlink is building. Without it, Starlink would not have the same financial outlook. That's a certainty. Now they're looking ahead on Starship, so there's this whole transition towards this new vehicle. One important thing to note is on the human spaceflight, they've now officially stopped the production of the Dragon capsule. So then SpaceX is now operating 5 capsules in their inventory and basically not producing a capsule more. So that leaves us with a hard stop or a hard deadline to which Starship has to be human rated. They are trying to add a couple of flights, so they're trying to extend the Dragon lifetimes to 15 flights each with NASA. However, it's not, I mean, it's in the process. And so that leaves Starship, yes, with a hard deadline on having to be human rated in a couple of years.
Wow. Okay, and then maybe skip into the fourth one. And so what impact do you anticipate Starship will have on SpaceX's business and the wider market once it does become operational?
It's going to be quite groundbreaking. So as we're seeing now, the economics of Falcon 9 with Starlink have been quite substantial. This is going to be pushed even further with the Starlink V3 and Starship couple. So the Starlink V3 is operating at around 1 terabyte per second, at least in those ranges. Probably a little bit less, but we'll see. In terms of usable capacity as well, we have to discount by a factor this capacity. But the reality is that if they're reaching very high launch cadences with Starship plus those Starlink V3s, SpaceX is going to bring a huge amount of capacity to the market, and probably is going to help them at least serve saturated markets such as the US. Yeah, that will enable them to engage even more aggressively on their pricing strategies. Well, keeping up with them will be quite difficult in the end. Yeah.
Yeah. And Grace, Starlink's pricing model has also been evolving too, right? I mean, with moves like introducing a roaming plan and adjusting fees for some regions. what is the strategy behind these pricing changes, and how is SpaceX handling distribution and marketing to make Starlink accessible to different customer segments
Yeah,
around the world?
yeah. So, yeah, for sure, you're right. Starlink's pricing strategy has been really dynamic, as what we've observed over the years as well. They have been very agile in how they adjust their strategy. So it doesn't take like weeks or years to adjust it. It's like a day sort of thing that, and you
Mm.
see new plans come up. They try and innovate a lot. Essentially, we see a lot of promotions and discounted programs that run which target different user segments, whether probably, for example, they have plans that are capped data, which is capped data provided at a high speed, and they are very cheap to purchase, so they can capture the customers who are in that sort of need. They also have discounts and referral programs which help spread the word, increase the access. They have dynamic regional pricing adjusted according to the income levels of the countries. And the best part of the distribution, which personally I also feel, is that they go direct to the consumer through the website and even through hyperscalers like Costco, Home Depot. So everyone knows Costco, and then you see a Starlink there. So that's the smart marketing that comes across from the company. So which makes their pricing really competitive. And to add on Lucas's point for V3 and Starship, basically the having a combination of high capacity satellites from V3s and a uh, low launch cost provider like the Starship would definitely give them more room to reduce their prices even more, and gives them competitiveness to place themselves in competition with even terrestrial players. So it just increases the and enhances the positioning of the company as a competitor, not just to satellite peers, but also within the terrestrial market. Obviously, barring some complications, but yeah.
Interesting. Okay, and we have a more detailed slide, I think, to show 2025 financials. But before we get to that, I have to ask you, a typical journalist question. As experts on SpaceX and the industry, was there anything that surprised you as you were compiling this data?
Well, so I think I briefly touched on that, but the thing that surprised us a lot was that when we used to look at SpaceX, we looked at its launch business first and then moved to Starlink. And
Mm.
then we saw, while compiling the data in 2024, how the Starlink top line surpassed the space transportation as per our estimates. And we saw that Starlink became the growth engine, and then the launch business started becoming like a maturing autopilot mode sort of a business line, which is the backbone for sure, but Starlink is the one driving the profitability and the top line as well. So that's one thing which definitely struck out for us.
That's an interesting thing as well to when you look at Rocket Lab, for instance, and you look at their financials, you can see that it's the same thing, whereas it's a launch service provider, which is generating most of their revenues not from launch service activities. And pivoting has been absolutely crucial for SpaceX, but as well for Rocket Lab towards other sources of income.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's look at this growth driver. Can we pull up the final slide here? Excellent. Okay, so lots to take in. But first, SpaceX has poured billions into Starlink and Starship development. What did your analysis reveal about their overall revenues, profitability, and its ability to finance these ambitious projects going forward?
Yeah, so as you see on the screen, the SpaceX revenue, the blue bar, you see it growing much faster than the gray bar, which are the expenses, and essentially adding to the profitability of the segment. So in our analysis, we saw that SpaceX is expected to reach around 16 billion top line revenues in 2025, and the EBITDA margins, which is the profitability, is expected to reach around 50% for the entire group. We also saw, because you mentioned funding, after 2022 there haven't been any private funding rounds, which essentially indicate to the fact that they're now a little bit self-sustaining in cash generation and
Mm.
covering their own expenses like Starlink deployment, etc. But on this point, I think again it's very important to understand that Starlink deployment, which includes manufacturing, launch, and everything is heavily backed by the internal subsidies for launch that Starlink receives. So there are subsidies that come in handy from having a launcher in your portfolio, which definitely add to the cash that's left for the company and makes it self-sustaining. In terms of financing other missions, I think there is a possibility that there might be other funding rounds, but those will be more for like very high capex intensive sort of missions like Mars exploration, moon exploration, etc. And probably Lucas can speak more to this point, but they've also leveraged and utilized public funding a lot for developing their vehicles and for their R&D research, which is a big part of their work at SpaceX as well. So I think that's an interesting model which they could possibly keep replicating for funding needs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
One of the interesting findings of this, I'm sorry, Jason, but just to add on what Grace was saying, one of the interesting findings of this is that basically SpaceX, all their vehicles have been financed on public funding, whether it is the Dragon capsule, whether it is Falcon 9, whether it is Starship now with the HLS contracts. We see a strategy that it basically revolves around having the development supported by public funding. And this is now even more true now with the new White House budget request proposal that has been published this week, where we see kind of a strategic shift towards Mars and probably now towards SpaceX as well for the Starship vehicle and the Mars version and the moon versions, HLS, etc.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I was going to ask you around that, but also are you able to add anything more on just what that breakdown looks like between revenues from Starlink and launch services? We're thinking about Starship coming into play as well. How does that change the dynamic there?
Yeah, sure. I can just add on that. So for 2024, when we were doing the model, we saw like an almost equal split between the launch and the Starlink services in terms of the revenues. And for 2025, we saw Starlink take up more share, reaching about 60% of the 16 billion revenues that we expect from 2025. And in terms of profitability, it's interesting because the overall company profitability is expected to increase by around 5% over the year course of 2025, which is primarily led by Starlink. So there is more profitability generated from Starlink given the higher top line and the increased subscriber growth as well. And launch, we assessed it to relatively stay stable in terms of profitability. So you see that Starlink would drive the growth. In terms of numbers, I think Starlink reaches around 54% profitability in 2025 as per our projections, and launch would stick about 30 to 32%. So that should be the mix of top line and profitability going forward.
Yeah, and looking at Starship, we don't expect Starship to yield any commercial revenues, at least for quite a few years now, because I mean, in the backlog of Starship, you have priority is Starlink V3, of course. Just when you look at the revenues it's generating, it's just a no-brainer. And the HLS missions as well, which will require a lot of launches to fill the tankers, to launch the HLS missions, etc. So we don't expect SpaceX to launch commercial Starships before at least 2027, 2028, and we'll see by the time.
Good stuff. Okay, thank you for that. So, yeah, well, even with SpaceX's lead, competitors are on the rise. You know, in launch, new rockets, some other companies are coming online, and in satellite internet, rival constellations like Amazon's Project Kuiper are gearing up. You know, just had their first batch of operational satellites go up. How do these emerging competitors figure in your outlook for SpaceX, and can they challenge SpaceX's market dominance?
Yes, so there will in the end, of course, but it's going to be a complicated ride in the sense that competitors are not catching up to SpaceX, but SpaceX is already one step ahead, developing their V3 and Starship, which will dramatically reduce their cost structure. So as Grace was saying, leaving them way more room to decrease as well their pricings on the markets, which makes them even more competitive. So yes, there is still room in the market. Competitors are gearing up, but it has to be said that they're a bit late to market. Let's say that SpaceX has already quite the advance, and keeping up with the SpaceX's pace will be quite a challenging task. Yeah.
Yep. And from Starlink's sense, sorry, just to add on, there will always be some segments where there's a need for resiliency, and the customers would not want to rely just on one network provider, and that's important to consider that there will be a room for other competitors for sure. So it's not that it's just one man show for the satellite connectivity market. There is definite room for other customers, but it really depends on the segment as well. So for example, consumer broadband is pretty saturated with Starlink, but things like in-flight connectivity does require some level of resiliency, which is much more than consumer broadband, which gives a lot of scope to other constellations to make a play there.
Well, so then what do you see as the biggest risks or challenges that could slow down SpaceX's momentum? Could we see, for example, regulatory hurdles or major technical setbacks significantly derail the company's plans in launch or connectivity services? We had some news out of India today. I don't know if you want to talk about, Grace.
Yeah. So I think you touched the perfect point for the challenges. I would have thought of regulatory hurdles if you asked me that question. And for sure, I think now that the stage where Starlink is at, they've penetrated a lot in multiple markets, and now they're looking for new markets as well. And those new markets could be countries like India, where it's a mass market, high volume sort of situation. And once the market opens, there's a boom of growth that could come in. And the hurdle there is that the regulatory policies are getting tougher. Like today, it was announced that they have tightened the security and data compliance regulations for satellite connectivity. And that also comes from a lot of geopolitics that is going on within the country and around it. So that's something hard to traverse, but it not only impacts Starlink, the regulations, it will impact other players as well, but definitely Starlink. Another hurdle that comes to mind, but maybe not a big one, would be there were issues of network congestion in the past, but SpaceX has worked a lot towards handling those, for example, by providing tiered plans, doing proper resource allocation, etc. And I think the pressure should be relieved with V3 capacity coming into the market, but that's something that they have faced as a hurdle in the past for sure. So it's something that can happen again.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Well, SpaceX is also known for pushing into new frontiers. Beyond the current projects that we've discussed, what new opportunities or ventures do you think SpaceX could pursue in the future? For instance, could we eventually see SpaceX get into point-to-point travel on Earth or some other bold initiative?
Yes, so point-to-point is an interesting one. It doesn't seem like a viable solution, at least in the short to medium term. Even if the military gets some interest in that, there's a lot of challenges that needs to be addressed. You need to deploy a spaceport to catch and relaunch the Starships on site. You need to have the cost to maintaining a Starship ready to fly and completely packed with the supplies you need. And just the time it requires for the launch procedures is an inhibitors as well. So plus you would lose a lot of performance by launching and basically catching a full Starship on Earth. So you can do it in an easier way by just air transport, and it just requires a lot of logistics and hurdles. So it doesn't seem like a viable option, especially in war times. But however, the DoD has tried out so many different things and so many ambitious plans that we never know with the DoD and with the financial runway they have. So we'll see what happens. But bottom line is that it's again one contract that helps SpaceX develop their vehicles based on public funding. So I mean, it's a win for SpaceX no matter what.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. All right, well then one more, if I may, before we get into audience questions. Yeah, thus far, SpaceX has remained a privately funded company, but they appear to be doing very for cash, let's say. But do you see a move from them that could warrant going public or something like that?
So yeah, in our analysis, basically we see that SpaceX through Starlink is now a cash generating business, which is becoming self-sustaining. And as Grace said, they not needed to require to raise private funds since 2023. So they would need cash for very ambitious projects such as the Mars exploration. But here again, with the latest White House proposal, we're seeing that basically it's going to be based, at least the first missions in the 2028 launch window are probably going to be based with public money, financed with public money. So in the longer run, if public funds dry up in this Mars exploration roadmap, we could see SpaceX requiring to go to the IPO process to raise substantial amounts of cash to finance this ambitious program of exploring another planet. But in the short term, more realistically and with more revenue generating potential would be the D2D market, where the opportunity can be quite significant. I mean, mass adoption will of course have some challenges, but we could see dedicated offers emerge as SpaceX always do. So yeah, probably the
Yeah.
D2D market in the short term and the Mars exploration in the long term.
Now, I have to ask before, sorry, I had to, and maybe it was one for Grace, but the D2D market, direct to device or direct to smartphone connectivity, with we're hearing a lot of excitement around that. How important could that revenue stream be for Starlink in the next few years, say?
Yeah, I think D2D is talked about for a reason. It is a definite market segment that Starlink is looking at. And in terms of financials as well, we do see an uptake in we have an uptake in 2025 as well. I think we are a little shy of 1 million subscribers. That's what we project for 2025 for Starlink. The model there is a little different because it depends on the MNO that's close at interaction with the MNOs as well, the mobile network operators, and what sort of revenue model that they come up with, whether it's a revenue share, whether it's a top up. It's interesting to look at as well. So I think it'll be a big market once it breaks in, and it's something to look out for, and you will see definite updates in our report when we come with further editions as well, talking more about D2D and how Starlink is faring in those markets for sure.
Very good. Thank you. All right. Okay, Dan, over to you. What questions from the audience do we have so far?
Wow. Thanks, Jason. And thanks everyone for sending in your questions. Obviously, we can't get to all of them, but I appreciate it all the same. I would like to start with a question that actually two of our audience members asked, and this is for anyone, I suppose. An anonymous attendee asked, Tesla's reputation and financial performances seem to have suffered from Musk's political involvements. I think they're talking about the Tesla takedown movement. Do you expect a similar impact for SpaceX? And similarly, Adam Marks submitted, how do you see any geopolitical headwinds on Starlink growth from Elon's plunging favorability from around half the US and European population? Countries don't want to rely on one man's control of their government connectivity. Do you see anything similar to the Tesla impact in space?
I can take from the Starlink sense. So from a Starlink point of view, definitely there is an impact of geopolitical situations for sure, but it's gone either way. It can be positive as well and negative as well. For example, for Canada, there is a definite news about canceling of enterprise contracts for Starlink. But given the lack of alternate solutions that can match such performance that Starlink provides, there is also a little bit of pushback, and there are contracts that are still getting signed up. So it's a mixed sort of impact that's coming up. We also saw that Vietnam, another geography, they have started like a 5-year probation program with Starlink connectivity. So, and this was after the geopolitical situation changing. So it's a mixed impact. We do see it, hampering the growth at some places, but also enhancing. So more or less a mixed sort of uptake across the world.
Yeah, in Canada, there's a Canadian company, Telesat, building their own
Yeah,
low Earth orbit constellation. Europe has plans for a sovereign broadband constellation, but these constellations are still very, very far away. And Starlink
exactly.
is the real
And so
one.
just the lack of alternate solution makes the demand for the company.
Right, right. Thank you. Look, it's Per Peterson. Sorry if I butcher any names, asks, in the long run, once the 42,000 or so satellites are at the end of their lifespan, will this business model be sustainable with a constant replacement of perhaps 4,000 satellites per year?
So it is unlikely that they'll launch the 42,000s. Now with the transition towards V3, so we don't know exactly how many V2s they still have left, but with the transition into the V3, we'll probably see a couple of thousand satellites being launched every year. It is hard to say whether or not this will suffice Starlink. It depends as well on the take-up rate and on the saturation of some of the markets. So difficult answer to have a definite number on this.
Perfectly fair. You touched on this briefly, Grace, I think, but an anonymous attendee asks, how will the proposed NASA budget cuts by the White House affect Starlink and the general government contracting environment going forward?
Yeah, I think, Lucas, do you want to take that, the White House budget question?
Yes. So on the
Yeah.
Starlink side, it shouldn't be too much of an impact in the sense that Starlink does not have a lot of implication with those budget cuts. It's mostly for the DoD as well, so no major impact on this one. However, on the space transportation side, there will be major impact as we're seeing. So we're seeing a major cuttings for all science budgets and non-human exploration programs. And we're seeing budget increases for human exploration programs, especially for Mars. And on the moon aspect, we're seeing cancellation of SLS, Orion, the Gateway, as soon as Artemis 3. I mean, after Artemis 3 mission, so after the boots on the moon, they will probably, or at least the White House proposes that they will transition to more cost-effective solutions. Yeah, it means only probably one player here. We're only talking about SpaceX. So yeah, probably the big winner, at least on the exploration side for Starship, whether it is on the moon, but as well on the 2028 Mars launch window.
Great. Kevin had a question about consumer product growth. He said, do you see fast development of Starlink consumer products market versus other competitors in hardware, such as business, home, and mobile satellite routers and the new Starlink router mini? Is curious about growth of production lines and how all of that factors in.
Yeah, I think that's a good question because yes, there's a lot of growth in subscribers for Starlink, and we keep talking about that. But the reason and the support for underpinning that growth is the terminal production, essentially, that they have achieved, the rate that they've achieved. From what I remember from my analysis, it was around 20K I think it was 20K in 2022, the production rate, and it's around 90K now. So the growth has been tremendous. And I think that speaks to the growth across applications.
Yeah, terminal production is basically one of the limiting factors. We've seen they're opening new factories throughout the last years. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Apparently, inventory should be quite minimal,
Yeah.
at least on the terminals. So they're selling as they produce.
Great. I know we only have a couple of minutes left, so Jason, if you'd like to take it back for any final questions or remarks.
Yeah, just one more for me because I think we should talk about sustainability in space because with thousands and thousands of Starlink satellites orbiting Earth, there are concerns about space junk and impacts on the night sky for astronomers. So I'm wondering what is SpaceX doing to ensure Starlink's growth remains sustainable and doesn't pose a long-term hazard in orbit to stargazers or to those operating in orbit and also stargazers on the ground, but also how much of a near-term issue could that become for SpaceX and others in the industry?
This is a very good question. So we've seen that they're having to take several initiatives to kind of lower the impact of this. However, if you have 20,000 satellites orbiting, it will have some sort of impact. Recently, they've asked the FCC to lower as well the orbit of the satellites to, I think it was 350 kilometers something, which could help them improve their performance, especially on the D2D market, which could be a very high interest for Starlink, because it would enable them to basically pass from just a basic text messaging to voice, and maybe later down the line as well to data on the D2D market. So good interest in for the SpaceX business, and this could as well increase the rate at which those satellites are deorbiting. So that's one point, but reality is that with a lot of satellites, you will have some sort of impact. At some point, there's nothing you can do about it.
Okay, very good. All right, and then I believe there's another slide we can put up with some contact information for you two, and then also a QR code for a free extract of your reports. Do we have that on here?
Yes, so the report is being published today. So yeah, don't hesitate to go on the website and download this free extract. We're happy to answer any of the questions if you have some. And yeah.
Well, okay. Well, Grace, Lucas, thank you both again for giving us this exclusive first look at your latest report. It's been a real privilege to unpack these insights with you, and we look forward to following your continued work in this space.
Great. Thank you so much for having us. It was great talking to you.
Thanks, Jason, and thanks to the Space News team.
Yes, thank you.